Hi, this is Josh Bycer from GameWisdom.com. I hope you enjoyed this Game Industry Insight, a look behind the scenes at game development. And be sure to subscribe and you can pitch future video topics. Alright, for today's Industry Insight, this is going to be kind of a follow-up piece to the discussion we had about the Steam Direct fee announcement from last week. If you missed that video, I should have a link to it below. But to recap, Valve announced that the Steam Direct fee, or the fee to publish games that will be happening for new developers in the, I think, coming weeks at this point, will be $100 per game. And as we talked about, I'm not a big fan of that, and I know a lot of indie developers aren't as well. It's not even really a slap on the wrist in order to punish asset flippers and people who are just flooding Steam with crappy games. And in that video, I talked about how Steam is, at least from the offset or from the beginning, was viewed as kind of being the high-end store. This is, when you've made it, in a matter of speaking. And thinking about further and looking up some other options online over the weekend, I was thinking about possibly a better solution to this. And that is the discussion about quality control when it comes to video games. Now, for those of you who don't follow console development, in order to get your game approved to be on either Sony, Microsoft, Nintendo, any of the major platforms like that, your game has to go through certification. And this is a detailed list of requirements that your game must meet. Simple things, or quote-unquote simple things, like making sure, all the buttons on the controllers actually work or correspond to something. You're not having any game-breaking bugs. Your game meets maybe a suitable level of frames per second. Again, the list for this is something that is probably known from developers who have either done cross-porting jobs or have just worked on console platforms in the past. So, if there's any interesting tidbits on that front from someone who's worked on it, please let me know in the comments below, because I am very curious about it. But the point is that you can't just put any game on a console. It has to pass a set of standards. And going back to what we were talking about last week, the idea of these digital stores still doesn't get too far away from the idea of a traditional store. When I walk into my local supermarket, I expect to find food that has passed quality checks. I don't want to see Farmer Jim's bacon-like substance that expired 2 years ago on the shelf. And on the other side of things, it's up to the store to present the most popular or the best products that it can access to its customers. Because if all you sell is crap or stuff that's expired or is dangerous, who's going to want to visit that supermarket? And we have seen cases where stores have removed products, either due to complaints, any kind of health or medical scares, or even just because no one was buying it in the first place. But it's up to the store to maintain a level of quality. Now, as we've talked about on previous videos, standards and the game industry don't go well together. And as we've said, the main reason has to do with the fact that there is no standard for what is a video game. And if we bring up that ever popular question of what is a video game, we'll be here for probably another 20-30 minutes. But the point is, when it comes to identifying what is and what isn't a video game, there's nothing that's really easy in terms of qualifiers. I always use this example that I've played 5 to 10 minute art games, and I've played easily over 100 hours in RPGs, and both are defined by video games. And therein lies the problem. How do you set a set of standards that both those extreme spectrums and everything in the middle can meet? And it has to be something that can be viewed as universal. Because again, if we start having each store having its own set of standards, that's going to make things very tricky to manage and a nightmare for any first-time or indie developers. So over the weekend, I was looking at the store Itch.io, which chances are for those of you watching this, especially considering my fan base here is on more the hardcore side of things, you've probably heard that name once or twice over the last few years. Itch.io, which I hope I'm pronouncing correctly, started in 2015 as basically an indie game alternative to Steam. And the store has grown in major popularity over the last few years. I've even had several developer requests or keys provided by Itch.io from, I forget some of the big name key sites or press sites I subscribe to at the moment. But the point is that while it may not be obviously as known as Steam, Origin, Uplay, and the like, it is becoming very sizable, at least among the indie side of things. And looking at their terms of service and their rules, there are two things that really stick out to me. The first is that the publisher or the actual content creator actually has the choice to decide how much of a percentage the store gets on each copy sold. For those of you who don't know, whenever a game or whatever is sold on Steam, Valve will pocket 30% of the profit, and then 70% go to the developer and publisher. But Itch.io allows the whoever is putting out the content, designer, writer, video maker, whatever, to decide how much they want to give back to the store. You could give them 30%, you could give them 60%, or you could give them 0%. It's all up to the content creator. The other side of things is that there is an actual set of quality standards or guidelines for the store. If you don't meet their guidelines, as in you're publishing asset flips, you're releasing the same game with like multiple titles in order to try to boost your image or get people to buy the same games several times, and even just not having quality enough that people are reporting your game, Itch.io will basically remove your game from any kind of search listings, which means that unless someone already knows your page on the site, they will not be able to find your game. Which, for anyone who has sold a game on a digital store, you know that basically means your game is dead. And what I was thinking about is that if a store like this can have some sense of quality standards, why can't Steam? And I know with that said that there are a few popular answers why. As we've talked about, Valve is not keen on policing Steam. We've talked about this many times before with early access, with Greenlight, and with just them trying to basically be as hands-off as possible until the kettle comes to a boil, in a sense, when we have stuff like the slaughtering grounds, developers caught putting their own reviews into games, threatening users, or stuff like the Batman Arkham City and No Man's Sky debacle of the games just being such a unplayable for a lot of people on the storefront. And while that is certainly great in the extreme situations, I think it's about time that we need to set some quality standards. And I came up with a few over the last day or so that I want to see what you guys think, especially to see whether this would be considered too much, not enough, or if you have any other criteria you would like to add. And basically, when I was thinking about this, again, I'm trying to approach this as Steam being the high-end store. This is where, if you as the consumer, you're not expecting to find anything broken, busted, or just not popular. And I know that's going to be somewhat unfair to some indie developers, and I do have a point that I want to make about that after this. But here are the four that I came up with. The first one is pretty obvious. Your game has less than 100 sales. I mean, that should be pretty simple. If you can't sell 100 copies of your own game on the biggest digital store on the market, something is very wrong. The second one, your game has a Metacritic score less than 30. Now, I'm not a big fan of Metacritic and review scores. We've talked about that many times, but it has become kind of the aggregate for review scores and something that the consumers do watch and keep an eye out for, as evident whenever a popular game gets a really low score from someone. But I figure 30% or less is low enough that it can't be seen as a fluke, or it's not a good game with some flaws. I mean, I have played and enjoyed many games that have gotten 60 to 70 on Metacritic, but when we're talking like 20, 25, something tells me there's something really wrong with that game. The next one, if both the lifetime and recent reviews are very negative. As you know, when you're on Steam, when you go to a store page, it shows you a rough measurement of how that game is doing. It could be positive, very positive, somewhat negative, very negative, and all that. And what I figure in this case is that if a game is just completely in the red, then something is not right here. Did the developer release a broken patch? Has the game been abandoned? Is there something horribly wrong here that has reared its head past the release date? And then the fourth one is your game has less than 30 reviews associated to it from people who bought the game. And for those of you who missed the announcement, Steam changed the reviewing algorithms a few months ago. And what it means now is that in terms of the main reviews that are counted towards a game on Steam, it has to come from people who have bought the game. And now, while that is technically, or I should say, that is bad for people like me who review games on press copies, you should still expect a game to get reviews associated to it. So if you can't get at least 30 reviews to your game, again, something is not sounding right. Especially with the first point, your game can't even make 100 sales. And from that list, what I figure is, if a game has 2 of those 4 conditions for at least a 30-day period, that should be grounds for having that game removed off of Steam or no longer being, or essentially being blacklisted on the platform. Because again, these 4 are basically catastrophic issues. This is not something that should happen to great games, good games, or even just average games. Hence, again, why I said the Metacritic idea to less than 30. If your game has any of these 4 points to them, like I said, this is bad news. This is, again, like you're steering into the iceberg as the Titanic, and something needs to change. But like I said before we started this, I want to hear what you guys think about this, especially from any indie developers watching. Because, again, these kinds of talks rarely happen when it comes to the game industry. And I've said this before, but the game industry definitely has that Wild West approach in terms of everyone basically doing their own thing. Which is great because it means that, again, there's so much variety in the indie space. But on the downside, it makes it very hard to properly vet and provide some measure of quality to the consumer. And that gets back to the point that I wanted to say at the start, or before we got into this part with the 4 conditions. When it comes to selling games or digital stores with video games, essentially trust is a two-way street. You want the consumer to trust that they are buying quality games. That someone's not just putting an asset flip on the store, trying to pass off as their own, or as we've seen sadly in the last few years, developers threatening people not to write bad reviews, paying people, or even just having fake accounts to bolster their review score. And on the other side of things, we should trust the independent developers to put quality forward with their game. Not just try to make a game in a few weeks, barely put it together, and then try and sell it on Steam. Which again, Steam should, at least in my opinion, from some other opinions, should be seen as, again, the best and the brightest for the game industry. Now, of course, with that said, it still goes without saying that while these 4 points may be a start, it still unfortunately doesn't help the discoverability issue. And that, my friends, we are about 14 minutes in. We don't have the time to talk about that one today. But for those of you watching this, again, what do you think about having some kind of standard for quality control when it comes to video games? I also want to point out that of the 4 points that I listed, none of them directly involve the game itself. I'm not saying anything like your game must be at least 2 hours or more. It must have 3 levels at least. You must have a boss fight, because then we get into a whole nother can of worms to deal with. But again, when it comes to these kinds of standards, what do you guys think about them? And like I said at the start, are there any that you think would be really good that should be adopted by stores? And we could even go as far as not just saying Steam, but maybe stores in general. Now, like we talked about, when it comes to the retail or physical side, stores have quality standards. Again, you can't just put any old game into Best Buy, Walmart, GameStop, whatever. But the digital side is still very much up in the air. And like we said, when it came to the idea of having a refund policy, that certainly caused quite a stir. Because anytime we're trying to set standards for what it means to buy and sell games, like we've been saying all along, it's very hard to get everyone to agree on things. But with that said, we're going to wrap up today's industry insight here. For more of my thoughts on quality control, standards for Steam and for digital stores, there will be a post going up on Game Wisdom that's covering this. And if I time everything together, this should be going up at the exact same time as that post, and hopefully vice versa. If not, it will be out along the same day. But thank you so much for watching. If you're new, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. Check back for daily discussions on game design here and on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games. And if you have a suggestion for a future critical thought, be sure to let me know. But until next time, have a great night. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoy it, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and of course share with your friends. It always helps out. For daily posts on all manner of game design and industry topics, check out game-wisdom.com. To support the site and everything that I do, be sure to check out the Patreon campaign. If we can hit goals, it will mean more content for everyone to enjoy, and I'll be able to support myself and my household. If you want to follow me, you can find me on Twitter at GW for updates throughout the day and random thoughts from me. And lastly, you can find me on Twitch right over there at GW for daily streams most nights around 10 Eastern. Thanks again for watching the video, and be sure to check out more great content coming to the Game Wisdom channel real soon.